In a town where storms swallowed the streets whole, one father was about to learn.
A child's fever was rising, and the nearest doctor was 40 miles away, buried behind a wall of rain.
She had sworn, after everything, that she would never again let herself be needed by a man with a child. But 40 miles of flooded highway stood between her and a little girl she had never even met, and still, she drove.
Daniel Cole had exactly one rule he never broke: never let anyone see him fall apart. Not his co-workers, not his neighbors, and certainly not the mothers at Lily's school who watched him with a mixture of pity and curiosity every time he showed up alone to pick up duty. But on the night the storm rolled into Millbrook like a slow, deliberate warning, that rule cracked wide open, and if you've ever loved someone enough to be terrified of losing them, you already know exactly how that feels. If this story moves you even a little, do him and yourself a favor. Hit like and subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you long after the video ends. It started, as most disasters do, with something small. Lily had complained of a scratchy throat on Tuesday. By Thursday, it was a full-blown fever, the kind that made her cheeks blaze red and her small body tremble under 3 blankets. Daniel had done everything right: the children's medicine, the cool washcloths, the anxious calls to the after-hours nurse line. But by Friday night, with the storm system parked directly over Millbrook and the fever climbing past 103, he knew this was no longer something he could manage with a thermometer and hope. The nearest urgent care with a pediatric specialist was 40 miles out, past the county line, past the low bridge that flooded every time it rained hard for more than an hour, and it had been raining hard for 3. Daniel's truck, reliable on dry pavement, had a transmission that groaned in anything heavier than a drizzle, a fact he'd been meaning to fix for months and never had the spare cash to address. Single fatherhood had a way of turning every unfixed problem into a future emergency, and tonight, the future had arrived early. He called his sister first. No answer. She was 3 states away at a conference. He called his neighbor, Mr. Aldridge, who picked up sounding apologetic. His own car had a flat, and in this weather, he wasn't about to attempt the spare. Daniel scrolled through his contacts with the specific hollow panic of a man running out of names, and that was when he saw it. Mara Whitfield, RN, saved 8 months ago after she'd treated Lily for a bad allergic reaction at an urgent care clinic downtown. Daniel remembered her clearly: sharp, competent, kind to Lily in a way that felt instinctive rather than professional. He also remembered the conversation afterward, when he'd tried clumsily to ask her to coffee, and she had turned him down so fast and so firmly that he'd assumed there was a story there he wasn't meant to hear there was. Mara Whitfield had grown up the eldest of 4, raised almost single-handedly by a father who worked 2 jobs and leaned on her, at 12 years old, to be a second mother to her younger siblings. She had loved her father fiercely and resented him just as fiercely, in the quiet, guilty way children resent the parents who need them too much too soon. And then, in her 20s, she had fallen for a man who was, on paper, nothing like her father, until 3 months into dating him, she discovered she was slowly becoming the built-in mother to his 2 kids from a previous marriage, expected to cook, clean, comfort, and vanish into a role no one had actually offered her, just assumed she'd accept. She left, and she promised herself, standing in the rain outside his house with her bags in the trunk, that she would never again let a man's children become her unpaid, unspoken responsibility. Single dads to Mara weren't people. They were traps wearing kind smiles. So when Daniel Cole's name lit up her phone at 9:47 on a storming Friday night, her first instinct was to let it ring out. She stared at the screen through 3 full rings, her thumb hovering, old scar tissue prickling under her skin. But she was a nurse before she was anything else, and some part of her, the part that still remembered Lily's small hand gripping hers 8 months ago, while the little girl bravely tried not to cry, made her answer. Daniel's voice came through ragged, stripped of the easy charm she remembered from the clinic. "Mara, I'm sorry to call so late. It's Lily. Her fever's at 103.6 and it's not coming down, and I can't get my truck through this weather, and I don't know who else to." He stopped himself, embarrassed, the words tumbling out too fast. "I just need advice. What to watch for? I'm not asking you to. Is she responsive?" Mara cut in, already reaching for her keys, already hating herself a little for how quickly her training overrode her caution. "Is she drinking fluids? Any rash? Any stiffness in her neck?" He answered each question, and with every answer, Mara's professional brain quietly assembled a picture that worried her more than she let on. A fever that high, that stubborn, in a child that young. with a storm blocking every road to real medical help. This wasn't a wait-and-see situation. This was a get-her-seen-now situation, and the nearest urgent care with pediatric staff was the one where she herself sometimes picked up night shifts, 40 miles east. "Pack a bag," she said, surprising herself as much as him. "I'm coming to get her. Mara, you don't have to. I know I don't have to." Her voice was sharper than she meant it, sharp with the effort of overriding 8 years of self-protection in a single sentence. "I'm coming anyway. Be ready in 10 minutes. She hung up before he could argue, before she could talk herself out of it, and stood for a long moment in her kitchen, staring at her own reflection in the dark window, rain sluicing down the glass like the world itself was testing her resolve. Every hard-won boundary she'd built over the years was screaming at her to stay home, to send an ambulance instead, to keep herself safely outside the orbit of a single father and his sick little girl. But underneath the fear was something else. Something that had been quietly stirring since the moment 8 months ago when Lily had looked up at her mid-treatment and whispered, "You're not scary like the other doctors," with such open, uncomplicated trust that Mara had thought about it for weeks afterward. The drive to Daniel's house alone took 20 exhausting minutes, the wipers unable to keep pace with the downpour, the road ahead reduced to a smear of taillights and reflective paint. Twice she had to slow to a crawl through standing water, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel, her own father's voice echoing unbidden in her memory. "You don't owe anyone your whole self, Mara, not even when they need you." She had built her adult life around that lesson. Tonight she was breaking it for a stranger's daughter, and she didn't entirely understand why, except that maybe it wasn't really about Daniel at all. Maybe it never had been. When she pulled into his driveway, Daniel was already on the porch, drenched despite the awning, Lily bundled in blankets in his arms, her small face flushed and glassy-eyed but awake. He looked at Mara's car like he couldn't quite believe it was real, like some part of him had expected her not to come. "You came," he said, voice cracking, rain running down his face indistinguishable from anything else. "Get in the car, Daniel," Mara said, already reaching to help settle Lily into the back seat, checking her pulse with the automatic calm of someone who had done this 1,000 times, even as her own heart hammered for entirely different reasons. "We've got 40 miles in a storm that isn't getting any friendlier." The drive east was the longest of Mara's life. The county road flooded in 2 low spots, forcing her to detour through unfamiliar backstreets she navigated on instinct and a half-remembered map. Lily drifted in and out of feverish sleep in the back seat, occasionally murmuring for her stuffed rabbit, and each time, Daniel twisted around to reassure her while Mara kept both hands locked on the wheel, focused entirely on keeping the car steady against gusts that shoved it sideways on the open stretches. At one point, headlights from an oncoming truck blinded her through the rain-smeared windshield, and she overcorrected, the car fishtailing for one gut-lurching second before she wrestled it back under control. Daniel's hand shot out instinctively to brace against the dashboard, and in the tense silence afterward, he looked at her with something that wasn't just gratitude anymore. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked quietly, once Lily had drifted back to sleep. "You made it pretty clear back at the clinic that this," he gestured vaguely between them, "wasn't something you wanted." Mara kept her eyes on the road, jaw tight, torn between the easy lie and the harder truth. "It's not about what I want," she said finally. "It's about doing the right thing for a kid who didn't choose any of this. I know what it's like to be a kid who needed someone to just show up." She paused, then added, quieter, "I had a father who needed me before I even understood what needing was. I promised myself I'd never let a man's kids become my responsibility again. But Lily isn't a responsibility, Daniel. She's just a scared little girl in a storm, and so was I once. And nobody came for me the way I'm trying to come for her." The confession hung in the car, raw and unplanned, and Daniel didn't try to fill the silence with reassurance. He simply reached over briefly and squeezed her hand where it gripped the gear shift, and Mara let him, just for a second, before pulling back to both hands on the wheel because the storm demanded nothing less. They reached the urgent care clinic at 11:52 p.m., soaked and shaking with adrenaline, and the on-call pediatrician took one look at Lily's temperature and rushed her back immediately. The next hour blurred into fluorescent lighting, hushed medical terminology, and the particular helplessness of a parent forced to wait outside a curtain while professionals worked. Mara stayed the entire time, not as staff, not as an obligation, but simply because she couldn't make herself leave, sitting beside Daniel in hard plastic chairs, occasionally translating the doctor's rapid-fire updates into plain, steadying language he could actually absorb through his fear. By 1 a.m., the fever had begun to break under IV fluids and medication, and the pediatrician emerged to say the words every parent in that situation is praying to hear: "She's going to be fine." Daniel's legs nearly gave out with relief, and it was Mara who caught his arm. Steady, present, real. "Thank you," he said, and it came out cracked, meaning far more than the 2 words could carry. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't answered that phone." "You would have found another way," Mara said, though her voice wavered. "Parents always do. But I'm glad I didn't make you find it alone." They sat together in the waiting room until dawn, watching the storm finally exhaust itself against the windows. And somewhere in those quiet hours, something shifted permanently between them. Not the desperate adrenaline of the drive, but something slower and steadier, built out of an entire night spent choosing each other, again and again in small, unglamorous ways. Mara realized, watching Daniel doze upright in an uncomfortable chair with Lily's small, sleeping hand wrapped around his finger through the hospital bed rail, that she hadn't spent the night as anyone's unpaid caretaker. She had spent it as someone who mattered, someone whose presence had been wanted rather than assumed. And that distinction, she understood now, had been the entire wound all along. In the weeks that followed, Mara didn't disappear the way she once would have, retreating the moment the crisis passed and the need for her expired. She stayed, first cautiously, dropping by with soup during Lily's recovery, then more deliberately, saying yes to that coffee Daniel had once clumsily offered, then slowly becoming a fixture at Sunday pancake breakfast that Lily began requesting by name. She never became anyone's built-in mother by default. Daniel made certain of that, asking rather than assuming, showing up as a partner rather than a project. And Mara, for the first time in years, let herself be needed by choice instead of obligation, discovering that the difference between the two was the difference between drowning and finally being held above water. Nearly a year later, on the anniversary of that storm, Lily, healthy, freckled, missing her 2 front teeth, asked Mara to help her draw a picture for the school art show. It showed a car driving through blue crayon rain toward a little yellow house, a red heart scribbled hopefully above the roof. "This is the night you came to save me," Lily explained matter-of-factly, like it was simply established history. Mara looked at the drawing for a long moment, throat tight, and then gently corrected her. "Sweetheart," she said, "that night you saved me too." Sometimes the storms that terrify us the most turn out to be the ones that finally wash away everything we were afraid to feel, leaving behind, when the rain finally stops, exactly the family we didn't know we were allowed to want.